Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a special video talking about how I would adapt one of my favorite series. I'm specifically talking about how I would adapt the I Am Not a Serial Killer series, or also known as the John Cleaver series, from Dan Wells. Dan Wells is an author that 2 years ago was not on my radar much. I was aware of him with, I knew that Brandon Sanderson in some interviews had offhandedly mentioned this guy he worked with, Dan Wells. And then I remembered Dan actually went on one of Brandon's streams one time, back when he was doing live streams every week. And that was a lot of fun. And then I heard that they were going to be doing a podcast together, and I said, I want to get in on ground zero on that one. So I started listening from the first day that the first episode released. I've been listening to every single Intentionally Blank podcast since it came out, and apparently they do another podcast called Writing Excuses with some other people that I'm just now, in the last month, getting into. So I knew Dan Wells from his podcasts and his interviews. Had not read any of his books, but finally was like, you know what? I want to meet him and read some of his books. And so I read the I Am Not Serial Killer trilogy, including this book, Mr. Monster, my favorite of the series, and I Don't Want to Kill You. Brilliant titles, brilliant book series. And then I've read two of his other books, Ghost Station and Extreme Makeover. Ooh, this book is messed up. This book is messed up. Oh, so messed up. But I've read his 5 of his books so far, and I intend to read all of his books one day because they're just that good. I've enjoyed every book I've read from him, although he can't write an ending. But his version of he has an opinion on how endings should go, and that is completely opposite to what my personal opinion of how an ending should go. But regardless, he writes good books, and some of his best books are his I Am Not a Serial Killer series. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how I would adapt that series into live action, because I think it would be very easy and very profitable. So I'm not going to go too much into detail on the series, but I'm basically going to do a basic premise for it, and then I'll give a little bit of hints of how I would do things. And I have a few fan castings, but really, Dan Wells writes his books in such a way that really you do not have to have a specific actor do it. I know that they did do one movie of I Am Not a Serial Killer that had Max Records and Christopher Lloyd, and I've heard it's really good. I have not watched it because I am just waiting for it to become free. Also because I haven't had too much reason to, other than the fact that I like the books. And I didn't want that movie to taint how I view this book series. I've seen the trailer and that's it. And I've heard Dan Wells talk about it a lot. But I didn't want that to taint how I felt about the book series yet. And so I want to read, he has books 4, 5, and 6, so 3 more books, and he has a little novella that I want to read before I watch that movie. But I'm specifically talking about how I do the first trilogy, the first 3 books. I'm Not a Serial Killer, Mr. Monster, and I Don't Want to Kill You. And so first I'll talk about the design of the project. How would I do it? A lot of people are moving to streaming TV shows or limited series. Don't think that's the right move to go here. I think that this book series, each book lends itself perfectly to movie form. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say is that I think that this could be done through a Blumhouse-like production company. Blumhouse is the production company from Universal that produces horror movies for really cheap. For $10 million, 15, maybe 20 million at most. Blumhouse really does not spend a lot of money, but because they are so cheap, their movies bring back a significant return at the box office and in the ancillary markets, like premium video on demand and in streaming. So I think that a company like that should be the ones running this. So obviously I would say Universal, they're probably the best in the horror game. I don't watch horror, but I watch YouTubers who cover horror movies, who cover the box office of horror movies, and I think that Blumhouse, that at Universal, is the best place in terms of getting the money back that they'll spend. However, Blumhouse, from what I've seen, they do a lot of gratuity in their books, in their movies, and there's just a lot of grossness, and most of them are R-rated. I know they have some PG-13 horror, but I don't like R-rated stuff, especially R-rated horror. So I think that I'd be a little bit reticent on that aspect of it. I think that Paramount is another studio that could do PG-13. And I think that they could do horror and do it well. But really, I think this should be PG-13 because it doesn't need to be over the top. There's no over the top language in these books, thank goodness. There's also no over the top like sexuality or stuff, and no over the top violence. Really, there is some horrifying elements and some scary stuff, but you can do that PG-13. You don't need to be R-rated. And so I think that that's a better route to go, and I think it leaves more money on the table potentially. And so that's the kind of studio, and let's talk about specifically the budget. I think that they could spend between 10 and 15 million. I think that if they spent 10 million, they could make a solid movie. If they were willing to up it to 15, I think they could get some real A-list actors to be part of it, especially if they are really tight in their shooting schedule and they don't have to take too long to shoot the movie. If they can do it over the course of like a month or two, I think that they could really make this for very cheap. As such, you could market it for cheap. So if you spent, let's make this a more expensive movie than I'm even willing to make it. Let's say it's $20 million to produce the movie. I don't think you'd need that much. I think you'd do it for 10 or 15, but let's say 20 million. And you'd need to do about maybe 15 or 10 million on a lower end to do marketing for this movie, but let's make it the same as the production. So let's say it's like 20 million. So now is between production budgets and marketing budgets, that's $40 million being spent on the movie. That means that depending on the estimate, depending on who you're asking, some people would say you'd need to make on the low end of $60 million, and some people would say on the high end you'd have to make $80 million on the movie worldwide to make a profit. I think both numbers are absolutely attainable if you make the right type of film. And so I think that this would be a fantastic movie because I think that it could break $100 million worldwide. Why do I think that? Because one, the book series is popular in Europe, in parts of Europe, specifically Germany, and it's also particularly popular in South America. Dan Wells has talked about how he probably could have, at the beginning of his career, he could have never sold in the United States, only sold in Europe and South America, and that could have been his money, all the books he wrote. He would have been just a foreign writer because he sold so well there. So I think that those audiences, if you distributed the film down in those territories, I think that it would do quite well. And so domestically, it still would need to do a fairly good amount domestically. But if you make a good movie, I think people would come, especially if you do a few other things that I want to do in here. There's a few actors I think that if you got, people would come see the movie. And I think that there's one thing regarding cameos you could do that would really drive an audience. So I think that making sure you have that foreign distribution, particularly in Europe and in South America, would help boost the box office substantially. Because so many horror films rely like almost entirely on the domestic box office, and you don't need to do that with a movie like this, where the audience is worldwide, especially in Europe and South America. So let's talk about some potential talent that I think could work on this type of a project. In terms of directors, I'm not a knowledgeable person on horror directors, so I kind of want to stay away from that because I'm just not smart enough about it. But I think that I have some idea on actors that could be in this series. So first, I have four actors that I thought, four roles that I wanted to cast. And most of the roles, I have two actors in mind, but really, with every single role I talk about, it could be any actor. Just about that fits the basic description for either a young boy or an old man or a mom character or the doctor. Like really, you can go in a lot of different directions with the actors that you cast. So if you need to go on the cheaper end and you can't afford the more expensive actors, it would totally work. But if you could afford more expensive actors, I think it would work and might even bring in more box office potentially. So let's talk about our main character. I have one actor in mind that I've seen in some projects that I think would be a terrific main character, and that is the main character John Wayne Cleaver, the high schooler who is hunting, who is obsessed with serial killers. I think that he could be played by Finn Wolfhard, who was in the Stranger Things series. He's also been in Ghostbusters. He's been in the It movies. So Finn Wolfhard is one of those actors that he is no stranger to horror and to science fiction. And so he would be a natural fit for this type of a story. At the same time, he's just on the older side of the age. I think he's getting a little too risky to put, this will be after a movie that is done in the next 3 to 5 years because he's going to age out too fast. But I think if we were making the movie right now, he would be the perfect role for it. He kind of has the broodingness down that I think would be really good. He just needs to have more of a darker tone. He tends to have a more light tone in his characters, but if he had a dark tone, I think he could do it. And also, I think that he could bring a lot of fans to the project because of his music and his acting history. Or you could put another actor. There's a lot of other actors out there that I just don't know because I don't know a lot of teen actors. Next, I have the character of Mr. Crowley, probably the most important role outside of our main character that you'd have to cast. They got Christopher Lloyd, who is a great actor, who probably crushed the role. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure he crushed the role. The problem is, Christopher Lloyd does not drive ticket sales necessarily. He is not someone that people go to the movies because Christopher Lloyd's in a movie necessarily. But there are a few actors that I think are in a similar age group, not the exact same age group, but, are older actors that I think could draw audiences in. And one of them, I think that he would fit the role properly is Mark Hamill, who, of course, everyone knows as Luke Skywalker. For one thing, it would be a very unique role for Mark Hamill because he's usually either, as like a Luke Skywalker character, a really happy-go-lucky hero, or he's either a cartoonish villain in the CW series that he made appearances on, or he's literally a cartoon villain when he was on Batman the Animated Series. He probably would be more expensive, so you'd have to shell out a little bit of money to get him. But I think that if you got Mark Hamill to be Mr. Crowley, I think that audiences would really be interested in coming, and I think that he would do the role with respect, and I think he would do the role pretty well. If you can't afford Mark Hamill, because that's a real possibility if you're making this movie. The next person I would have is another science fiction actor, and that is Brett Spiner. I think that Brett Spiner is a good fit. He could be a hero, he could be a villain, he could be anything in between. I think he could play a mysterious character really well. He's also getting into that older. He doesn't have. He looks like an older actor, but he doesn't have the weathered look that some actors have. So you'd have to do some makeup on him, but he can act. And he can act well. And so I think he'd be fairly inexpensive to get. So those are my potential picks for Mr. Crowley. Then you have Dr. Neblin, which this isn't, in the original movie, they got a guy, I think he was in his 30s or 40s, but I think that this is a role you could play around with a little bit with the age. One actor I thought might actually be quite an entertaining fit is Grant Gustin. Again, usually in more silly roles or happy roles or not usually in sad, somber roles, and I think that this would be an interesting way for him to flex new muscles, and I think he wouldn't be too expensive to get as an actor. I don't have another actor potentially, so if you have other actors in mind for these main characters, let me know your thoughts down below. I am open to anyone. Finally, for the mom, for April Cleaver, I had two names in particular that I think would be really interesting to get. I think that both of them would drive some audiences and also would be the proper fit. The first one I have is Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman has been in science fiction and horror before. I'm thinking of Annihilation in particular, and Ex Machina. So she's been in those kind of heavy genre movies. So she's not entirely opposed to doing heavy genre movies. And this wouldn't be like a blockbuster in the same way that others might be, so she might even be willing to do this one. And she would add prestige to the cast, and I think she's at that age where she can start playing that type of a character in movies that she's going to be in. So I think that Natalie Portman would be a good fit here. for April Cleaver. However, you may not be able to afford her. You might have to go with another actress. And another actress that I think would do a good job is Rebecca Ferguson. She's already recently played a mom-type character in Dune, but I thought she did a stellar job in that, and I can't wait to see Dune Part 2. But I thought, you know what, if we could, if we brought her in here, I think she'd be a good fit. I think that she just have to lose the accent, the heavy accent that she has, develop kind of a Midwestern accent, but as an actor, I'm sure she could do it if she needed to. So Rebecca Ferguson, I think, could really do that role well. And my final point about how I would adapt it is I think there's something really easy, straightforward, and simple that the studio could do, whoever's making this could do, that would absolutely guarantee box office ticket sales. And that is to throw in some specific cameos from some specific people. And those cameos that I'm thinking of are the several Utah writers who are friends with Dan Wells. I'm thinking people like Brandon Sanderson. I'm thinking of Brandon Mull. I'm thinking of a couple of others, maybe Howard Taylor. I don't think Mary Robinette lives in Utah, but she's part of that group that hangs out. Get those types of authors all to be in the movie in a cameo role. I'm thinking of in the Twilight movies, they actually had a scene where they go inside a restaurant, and at the bar, Stephanie Meyer is sitting there, and it's like a blink and you miss it type thing. I think that if they did that and they had like they're going into a restaurant or something, and there's a table and they're sitting around the table, and you just happen to glance by and see all these famous authors. I think that that would be really entertaining and would probably be easy to do because they're probably not expensive people to get, but they have fan bases who would be interested in seeing them there. So I think that this is a way to guarantee and help their box office sales, to try to boost it a little bit, to try to make sure that it's a profitable movie. And if all you have to do is commit to the first movie, and if it's financially successful, do some sequels, make it a big movie series. So that is my pitch for how I would adapt the I Am Not a Serial Killer John Wayne Cleaver series from Dan Wells. If you have read this book, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And if you have thoughts on who should be cast, who should direct, who should write the script, any of those thoughts, let me know those down in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.